Let me talk to Marko Gasic now, international affairs commentator, often a guest on the programme. Hey there, Marko. Thanks for coming on at short notice. What's going on here tonight, then? Ship going towards just about, what, 18 kilometres or so from that very sensitive Russian border. Hadn't asked permission. All of a sudden, communications were lost. But then at the last minute, we hear, oh, it may have just got lost. We don't know. Was it a provocation or was it simply a mistake?
Well, it was certainly a mystery to start with. It wasn't a whodunit. It was a will he do it kind of affair. And in the end, he didn't. The captain turned back. But it may have something to do with what you were mentioning just now, that resolution at the General Assembly calling on Russia to preserve the kind of maritime security of the Kerch Strait. And what better for the Ukrainians to do for their part on that same day but to send their own ship over towards that strait and make the point that this is, in their opinion, theirs, and don't forget their place in this story. So it's a kind of like a barrier of the resolution at the UN with an incident which shows that in practice Ukraine hasn't abandoned its vision of the place of the Kerch Strait. And we don't. It could be a little bit to do with that as well.
You don't want to speculate, but it does seem a very unfortunate mistake, especially in a ship called the Donbass, given everything else that's going on at the moment, and the speculation about relations, etc., and Russian troop build-ups up to 100,000 at the Ukrainian border on Russian territory. Of course, at the end of the day, and Russia can do what it likes on its own territory. It's all a bit difficult, isn't it? I mean, how could this be allowed to happen tonight, considering how highly tense the situation is?
Well, I think also the fact that this was originally an old repair ship, so it's presented as a harmless ship. So had the Russians actually fired on the thing, it would have been presented as another example of Russian brutality. So the ship, if it was a provocation, was carefully chosen, even in the name itself. But you raised the wider question: is this part really of the general ratcheting up of tension in the region? And we've seen the only tensions in the region are caused by the...
Yeah, with what aim? With what aim would that be? I mean, Ukraine says it wants to get Crimea back. Crimea voted to go with Russia. It is what it is. How long is this going to go on for? Is it a row that the Ukraine is never going to forget?
Well, it will probably never will officially forget the Crimea, but I think it's more interested in the Donbass region. And all this talk of a Russian invasion seems to me to be a preemptive effort to keep Russia quiet in the event that Kiev decides to invade the Donbass republics. So it's designed to present any Russian reaction to aggression.
But of course, the way this is painted in the West is that Russia's going to maybe in the new year do the similar thing in reverse. It goes round in circles.
Well, it doesn't quite. It doesn't quite, because the whole point is to delegitimize the Russian action in advance while preparing your own. What Kiev has wanted for quite a long time to do is to attack rather as its Croatian compatriots did in 1995, the kind of secessionist area or the anti-government area to the east of the country by force and evict or exterminate the population within. That succeeded for the Croats, and the Ukrainians have been quite, in Kiev at any rate, have been quite inspired by that example, inviting Croat generals over in the past to discuss tactics. So their vision of the future of these two republics in the east of Ukraine is as a Russian-free zone where they can then settle others or at least force the population there into docility and to comply with their wishes. They can only do it through military means.
Yeah,
they can't do it through political means.
Is there any viable way forward here, or is this argument going to be kicked down the road for another decade? Or is it going to come to a head? What do you think's happening?
Well, as far as the Russians are concerned, Moscow, indeed, all that's required is for the Ukrainian government in Kiev to stick to the provisions of the Minsk peace agreement, by which they would keep to those positions agreed at Minsk rather than constantly go forward as the Kievan forces are doing now.
But it's getting nowhere.
It's getting slowly somewhere as far as the Ukrainian is in Kiev are concerned, because they're moving slowly into no man's land, killing villages in shooting there. They're just doing a low-level, wide front movement against the Donbass region and leaving themselves the possibility to finish it rather like as I say, the Croats did in '95, with an overall attack, hoping that the general propaganda from Joe Biden and company will prevent the Russians from reacting, so that rather as Serbia didn't react in the case of the Crimea attack by Croatia in '95. There are parallels. History does teach us something if we look at it a little bit more closely. I know it's a bit boring, but actually we can learn from the stratagems of the past as to what the stratagems.
Well, history also repeats itself. Are we in danger in the next? Just putting all these little incidents together, are we in danger? Was it coming to a head or not? Do you think it'll calm down?
I think that I believe that even President Putin said perhaps today made a reference to the Donbass situation being potentially genocide, which essentially means that if you Zelensky and Kiev attack the Donbass with the idea of evicting or exterminating the population, we will come in. And that's that invasion that the so-called invasion that Biden was trying to prevent the Russians from doing. It's actually, will the Russians intervene if the population is attacked in the east of Ukraine? And the answer is, of course, the Russians will be forced to. So as long as the Ukrainians understand that, and Americans too, then we will have peace, because they will understand that the Russians are prepared to use military force to enforce peace if the peace is attacked by Kiev.
Yeah, I was chatting to our senior correspondent just now. We were talking about the fact Mr. Zelensky and Joe Biden had an official chat earlier on. I wonder if anything that we've witnessed tonight, this kind of pantomime, I suppose you could call it, was anything to do with that, or maybe no connection at all?
I just feel it's the naval manifestation of something which is happening at the army level already in the Ukrainian forces, and then we also have the NATO's own troops on the borders of Russia and Belarus. You really have NATO ships and airplanes playing cat and mouse around the Black Sea. The pattern is really squeeze Russia, intimidate it, force it into quietness and acquiescence, and then when that's happened, then perhaps you can invade the east of Ukraine, the Donbass Republic, and take it for Kiev.
Yeah, I mean, the crux is here that Russia said it was given promises years ago that NATO would never come right up to its buffer, its barrier, if you like, or its, which is Belarus, which is Ukraine. But those promises have repeatedly been broken. Russia's being pushed and pushed and pushed here. I suppose on the other side of it, Ukraine is going to say, well, we can do what we want to do in our own territory as well. Who's right and wrong?
Well, I think that those who are right are those who want peace, and those who are wrong are those who are shaking the military pot around and hoping for a military solution. And unfortunately, those are the Kievan authorities, and aided and abetted by NATO and especially by the US. It's the US which needs a little war to distract from its farce in Afghanistan recently, and so it's banging on militarily here. But this kind of region, these kind of conflicts can lead to much, much wider conflicts, which could make Afghanistan look like a pea shooter.
Which is the worry, and that's something that nobody wants. Is there any solution? We talked about, could this issue be kicked down the road for another 10 years or so? Is this all building up to some sort of concession maybe from NATO or Ukraine, although they say no, we're going to do exactly what we want to do in our own territory. But could there be some solution brokered here that will appease Russia, that will appease Ukraine?
The thing is, the Ukraine needs to understand that it can't win militarily, even with American help. This can't be solved militarily. The only way it can solve it is politically. And the only political solution for Ukraine is to accept that the Donbass Ukrainians have their own feelings. Most of them are ethnic Russians anyway and have been forever. They have their own feelings and their own needs. And if Ukraine can come up with a federal system or a democratic system that allows for the self-expression of that population in the east of Ukraine, rather than try to intimidate it, ban its language, ban its Russian connections and so on. If Ukraine can recognize the reality of the population within it and create a society that can accommodate that, as well as its own Kievan nationalist element, then the country can survive and live and be Ukraine as a whole in its current borders. But if it tries to attack its own population in the east, it may well lose those borders in its act of aggression against the population within them.
Yeah, Marko, stay with me a minute. I just want to update our viewers. We've been talking for quite a while. I just want to update our viewers who have just joined us what's actually happening tonight. You're watching RT. Hello, good evening. There's breaking news. You can see it in red on your ticker. What's it saying now? Dangerous provocation. It just flipped as I looked at it. But basically, tonight, a ship from the Ukrainian Navy was moving towards the Russian border of Crimea's very sensitive Kerch Strait. That bridge there is where the border is. It was some 18 nautical miles heading towards that very sensitive area. Apparently it had ignored orders from the Russian side to state its intentions because it hadn't been given permission or it hadn't asked to go through there, which is a normal procedure. At the very last minute, it seems that ship called the Donbass, maybe with some irony or not, turned around. The latest we're getting now from the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense is that the Donbass is currently returning back to base, the headquarters of Kiev's operation in Donbass. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, more coming in now, saying our ship has all the right to sail in the Azov Sea because it's international waters. Back to you again. It's international waters, but the protocol is it should ask, nonetheless, if it... Well, is it international waters? No, I'm confused. It's saying, Ukraine is saying that Kerch Strait is international waters. Russia is saying, no, it's not. You've got to ask permission. Clarify for me, our viewers, what is the position?
Well, it's the position is, as far as the Russians are concerned, perfectly clear, and as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, is perfectly clear. And the two positions will never meet. The fact is, de facto, it's Russian waters, and as part of, since it's enclosed by Russia on both sides, if that's accepted, then it's also Russian waters as well. The Ukrainians say that the Sea of Azov is shared, and they're correct because, of course, territorial waters only extend a short way beyond your coastal line.
Marko, don't go away. I want to bring our senior correspondent, Marko Gasic. He's here in the studio as well. Clarify this tonight. Ukraine's saying they're international waters. Well, international waters are international waters. You can do what you like. Are they right?
Well, the waters, the territorial waters of Russia, both in Crimea and the Russian mainland. However, there is a UN charter, the law of the sea, and that says that marine traffic, as well as military traffic, naval traffic, it can pass through territorial waters. They need to get from a smaller water area to a larger one. So yes, certainly they can pass, but Russia sets the rules in its territorial waters. For example, if there is a crossing, then Russia's the government says that you must request permission for this reason or that reason to pass through here. Then yes, all marine traffic, international traffic, must seek permission.
And as we were saying earlier on, after what happened in 2018, those two gunboats and a Ukrainian tugboat, they were seized. They tried to do a similar thing. Russia back then said it's provocation. We don't quite know what's happened tonight still, but it's looking a bit peculiar. Back in 2019, as the outcome of that, the Ukrainian defense minister, I think, said that this kind of thing would never happen again. So was it a mistake tonight, or was it just a miscalculation?
Well, the defense minister of Ukraine has come out. He has just commented on what has happened. He called this command ship a peaceful search and rescue mission.
Rescuing what?
Well, that is the question. What did they find that they had to rescue 90 nautical miles away from a heavily guarded transit point, the Kerch Strait? Whatever it is that they were doing there, that is how he referred to the vessel. A command ship he has called a peaceful search and rescue mission going about its business in sensitive waters. That is what he has said.
All right, we'll come back to you in a minute. I've lost Marko Gasic, but I want to talk now to Dave Perkins. Dave, are you on the line? I've not had a chat with you before. I had to check comms. Can you hear me? Dave Perkins on the line.
I hear you well, and thanks for having me.
Fabulous. Dave Perkins, radio host and political analyst. Dave, this is an unusual situation, isn't it? What do you think's gone on tonight? I mean, it looks like it's been tamped down. That Ukrainian military ship did an about turn. It's going back to base after causing quite a lot of fuss at the Russian border. They're getting 18 nautical miles from it, called the Donbass too. Maybe ironically, maybe not. What's going on here?
We don't live in an age where upfront, straightforward, grand military action to conquer, seize territory, alter political situations and borders, that's not acceptable anymore in the world. And so now what you see and what you will see from here on out, I think, unless a tyrannical turn takes place, is that people are doing provocative inchworm routines where they step up, make a change, which cannot be itself attributed to a desire for war or called an act of war, but which raises the level of concern by the other side, which then steps up and make a change. And I've been listening with interest, your analyst pointing out that there are not a bunch of giant artillery pieces bristling off the deck of this Donbass ship. And so it's not as if the presence of that ship near a border that the Russians controlled was a kind of military threat, but also neither is the massing of Russians on their own territory in military terms a military threat, except to say now they can invade tomorrow. And a year ago, it would take them 6 months to build up this level of force, so they could not have invaded tomorrow a year ago. This is brinksmanship. Everyone's attempting to do the next step in the dance while they make their own personal preparations.
But the worry is it could be a step too far.
Well, precisely. And I think this is the step that the Russians took. And so they can be called the precipitators of whatever results in this conflict.
Well, they may be. Again, we're saying here we don't actually know what's happened. It may have just got lost. The radio comms may have gone amiss. We don't know if it was a provocation, as happened back in 2018. But
and that's the fine art of this whole thing, is not knowing whether
was Russia expected to take the bait if it had have been a provocation then?
I'm not sure. I think the Russians are as clever at this as anyone, and I think they are the first to sue for peace in any very small local situation so that they cannot be blamed for escalating. They want to be seen as the ones that are de-escalating, but at the same time, they started it. It's their troops that are on the border, and a tomorrow invasion is only possible because the Russians decided to make it possible by moving their assets to that place. And so you have to consider they are the ones who took the first step, and they are the ones who are leading the kabuki dance.
We've still got Marko Gasic on the line. Don't go away, though, Dave. I want to bring in Marko Gasic as well. Yeah, if it was I think you're still there. Are you there? Can you hear me? Yeah, great.
Yeah,
Sorry, I dismissed you earlier on. I thought you disappeared. Thanks for hanging on. If it was a provocation, no reason to think that it was, we're saying there was Russia expected to take the bait. What's your take on that? Should it have done? Should it not have done? Well, it didn't by the looks of it.
Well, I think there's many ways of skinning a cat, as they say, and it wouldn't have been difficult for the Russians to essentially land special forces on the ship and take it over by force without having to shell it to smithereens. Obviously, if the occupants of the ship put up armed resistance to those special forces, then that would be a different scenario, but they would have had to fire first. I'm sure the Russians know pretty well, the Spetsnaz and company know pretty well how to take a ship. It's probably part of their training, and I would imagine that that's what the Russians would have done. So I don't think the Russians would have allowed this, if it was a provocation, to provoke too much.
Yeah. Go back to Dave Perkins. Dave, given the fact that the tensions are so high here, and we're saying, was Russia expected to take the bait? If indeed it was, but we'll keep talking about this and putting the ifs there because we don't know until maybe it's confirmed or we've heard maybe what Russia officially has to say about it and what Ukraine officially has to say about it in the coming hours. But was there anything to be really gained here apart from making a headline as far as Ukraine's concerned?
I wonder if they're not engaging in distractive activities so that they can build up the forces that they are going to need in place to rebel against the Russian invasion. Everyone knows for the longest time, Vladimir Putin has entertained a vision of rebuilding the old Soviet empire, and Ukraine definitely a big part of it. They used to call it the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, where so much of the agriculture was done, and that and Georgia and many other countries are in line to be taken over by the Russians if they find no reason not to do it. And from where I sit here in the States, I see the previous president was someone that Putin would not provoke into action because he was someone who had proven that he would take action. Economic sanctions, military threats, all kinds of reasons why Putin would wait for the inauguration of our current president. And since then, it seems the timing of the military buildup indicates that it began almost immediately.
So to be clear, your theory here, just outline for our viewers here about what you said here about Putin's view on things and what may happen. Be clear. Tell me that clearly again and what you think's going on here.
I believe Putin was restrained by our previous president and does not feel one chain link of restraint at the hands of our current addled, elderly, incapacitated almost President Biden. And after that phone call on Zoom the other day, he has to be completely confirmed in his strongest suspicions about Biden's inability.
So you believe that Russia wants to take over Ukraine, maybe Georgia too, because there's a weak
I think that's a common understanding of Putin for many, many years, is that he has entertained a vision of rebuilding the former Soviet empire in his image and being the
well,
leader.
he always said it was the worst thing when it
history
collapsed. Look, I want to bring in our senior correspondent here, Dave. Coming back to you again. Please stick around. Thank you for your patience. Did you hear that, Murad, there? And Dave Perkins is basically saying that in his view, one theory could be that Putin's always said that, you know, the breakup of the Soviet Union was a terrible thing, and he may be trying to rebuild it again, invade Ukraine, invade Georgia, because there's a weak President Biden there now. Wouldn't have done it under Trump, but he could now. Do you buy that?
Well, it is a strange point of view. It is one that we have heard from various analysts, usually hostile to Russia, but it begs the question, why would Russia invade Ukraine and Georgia, two of the most hostile states on its periphery, both of which have huge, multi-million, incredibly hostile populations to Russia? It would be a tremendously complex, a tremendously deadly, given the resistance that there'd be there, mission, operation, and for what?
Marko Gasic, I think you're on the line as well.
He's a very poor nation.
What do you think about this? I don't know if you heard my question. I think you've been listening in. I think you're still patched in. What do you think about this theory? It's Russia trying to take over the world. Yes or no? What's going on?
About Dave's description was the description of Joe Biden, but all the rest, I'm afraid, is really pretty standard media alarmist, weapons of mass destruction, let's give them something to worry about so we can sell more arms kind of propaganda. Russia has no interest, as Murad said, in going to some two countries on its borders, invading them, occupying them, and then having to hold on to them forever. I mean, we've just seen America, the mighty US, has gone out with its tail between its legs, trying that on in one country. And now Dave is suggesting that Russia will be trying it with two countries simultaneously. I really find I do understand where he's coming from, because he's heard too much CNN, too much propaganda. Russia is a normal country with normal aspirations. It's plenty big enough. It doesn't want to get smaller, but it doesn't want to get bigger either.
Dave Perkins, well, you voted out on that one, theory or not. Do you think it was a mistake here tonight? Literally, this boat just got out of its territory. It lost its radio comms. It's turned back. So what? Thing over here. Is it a storm in a teacup or more to it?
I think we're trying too hard to analyze too much based on too little information in
rolling
too
news.
small a time frame. I think that we will get there with the passing of time, and I think that in spite of the correction that I've gotten from my colleagues, I appreciate you guys giving me the true information, but I haven't watched CNN in 15 years. I am a person with opinions, not given them, but coming up with them on his own, and I have a broad view of history, and I understand what sweeping changes take place right under our noses when we're focused on the small things as we are right now. And so I'll stand by what I've said here tonight, but I reject what you fellas have said about
even with all the inherent dangers that our senior correspondent Marko Gasic pointed out, if your theory here is correct, the inherent huge dangers that would bring for Russia's security, for world security.
I doubt the danger is as high as it was a year ago for the Russians in terms of the rest of the world response to this. And I think the American president and his ability and his political position have something to do with that. Not everything, but it's a significant factor, and it has turned in Putin's favor. And that could be the thing that has got him off his ledge and moving.
Stay there for a minute with us. Now I've got you two guys there, and I've also got Murad, our senior correspondent, with us. I'm very mindful if you're at home and you're just tuning in and think, what's going on here? Well, check out the red ticker at the bottom. You're watching RT International. It's Kevin Owen at your service this hour. We've been rolling for about 2 hours now because of a story that came in from the Kerch Strait tonight. Let me update that for you, show you mapping. A Ukrainian Navy ship earlier on had been approaching the Russian border of Crimea's Kerch Strait, but it changed course at the last minute around 18 nautical miles from that very sensitive border. It's sailing away now back to port. Ukraine's defense minister saying the ship didn't break any international laws. Russia not happy. We haven't had the official Russian response here, but it was merely doing, as our senior correspondent said just now, what it would do. It's a sensitive area. There's a bridge there with communications across it, a railway, a motorway, a very busy road anyway. And it's a place that's of strategic importance, and it's the normal agreement that any vessels, especially military one, going through there would first get the agreement of the Russian side. Murad Gasic Georgiev, our senior correspondent again. As far as we know tonight, that still stands. This boat that was heading that way broke off communications and continued going that way, even though it hadn't told Russia what it was doing. That's correct still?
Well, Russia, it initially, when it was contacted, it was asked, are you planning on crossing the strait? The Ukrainian vessel, a command ship, laid down, I believe, 1969, many times refurbished since, but it said that it wasn't planning on crossing the strait. And after that, it cut off all communications, it refused all hails, and it pressed on towards the strait, approaching to within 19 or 18 nautical miles.
Yeah, but how dodgy is that? How close is that?
That is very close. That is not quite in Russia's territorial waters. Those extend 12 miles usually. But the Ukrainian vessel obviously knew that the security situation in the strait is at all times high. So it is always on alert, always watching for traffic. And the Russian FSB, the Federal Security Service, has now come out and said that the behavior of the Ukrainian vessel was provocative as well as dangerous for marine traffic. There are 80 various vessels in the vicinity of the strait, the transit point, the crossing, as we speak, and all of that had been suspended while this chase was underway. The Ukrainians, however, coming out and saying that they were well within their rights, that they were transiting through Ukraine's territorial waters, and that this command ship was a peaceful search and rescue vessel. Search and rescue vessel. That is what the Ukrainian Defense Ministry has said. They have also issued a statement calling everything that Russia has said fake news. That is where we stand now. The vessel has turned around and is heading back for port where it came from this morning. It set off at 9 a.m.
All right, Dave Perkins on the line. I'm mindful you're still there, so therefore I want to bring you in. Marko Gasic too in a sec. We talked just now about your theory about Russia taking over the world, which I've got to say the broad consensus here was that, well, not the world, I'm exaggerating, I'm being frivolous, but you get the drift. That was knocked back here by our esteemed colleagues. However, what was really going on here tonight? It was a bit clumsy, wasn't it, as far as the Ukrainian side's concerned? A bit, not heavy-handed, it's far from heavy-handed, a bit, I wanted to say, cack-handed.
Well, it's difficult to know you're doing the right thing in terms of escalating by tiny degrees so as not to be accused of being too warlike. It's difficult to know in advance whether what you're doing is going to have the right effect, how it's going to turn out, and how the analysts are going to see it. It's difficult to know whether you're doing the right thing in the present time, and I think that has to do with them turning around. They probably had all the television networks on in the cabin of the ship, and they were making sure in real time that what they were doing had the desired effect and not one that was not desired. But in the present tense, it's difficult to know when you intend to escalate by tiny degrees whether what you're doing is having the effect of putting you on top or making you seem like the victim, or whatever effect the two players are attempting to try to create in world politics. Right now, it's all for the TV cameras, it's all for the analysts, and we won't know who won the day until enough of that analysts have weighed in and given the public an opinion. It's about public opinion.
Yeah, Marko Gasic, it's about public opinion. It was about making headlines. We touched on this earlier on. This is all assuming it wasn't a mistake and it literally got lost. We're not sure that was the case, but let's work on the theory that it was to make headlines, shall we? What sort of headlines will come out of this in the morning then? Marko Gasic.
Well, possibly none at the end of the day, because nothing much has actually happened. There'll be a small reference to it, and that'll be it. But to take the larger point that this incremental approach by the Ukrainian authorities has to do with headlines. Basically, there's not been many or any headlines about what the Ukraine has been doing for a considerable period recently, which is low-level killing of civilians, encroaching of space beyond the Minsk agreement, and taking over of those villages, mostly abandoned, to be fair, in that no man's land. But it's basically gradual, quiet, silent encroachment. The pundits in the West have generally not noticed, been silent, or considered it absolutely okay for them to do. So there won't be any headlines, and they will continue. The headlines have been all about the phony Russian invasion plan, which is, we can add that to the phony weapons of mass destruction, and all the various stories that always accompany interventions, usually supported by the Western side. So this is, I'm afraid, another one, false propaganda. Those are the headlines, fake news, as Donald Trump used to tell us only too well.
Yeah, Dave Perkins, storming a teacup that it's all going to die down. Have you heard what Marko had to say there? Do you agree or not?
I did, and I will stand up and take my beating like a man. Thank you, Marko, for your honesty. And I haven't checked with CNN yet, the source of my opinions, but I have been checking news quite a bit around the States today, and there's even less news making the screens in America than there is overseas right now. I think almost everyone in America has no idea this has even happened.
How dangerous could it have got tonight?
I doubt seriously that either party was willing to escalate more than one or two of these tiny degrees of incrementalism that each is clearly trying to follow the path of before they get where they're going. Whatever Putin has in mind, he's nowhere near ready to do it, although he's readier than he was 6 months ago. And whatever Ukraine has in mind, without American support and intervention being even the remotest possibility, that makes it more difficult for people on my side of the pond to analyze, because frankly, we don't know that much about what the status of the players are, the allies, and whether or not militarily they're ready for this, or even in their own country. As you say, the Donbass region is going to end up coming down on the side of Russia, and that's going to make everything more complicated for everyone, but probably easier for Putin, and that's got a lot to do with what his plans are, but we don't know what they are because the increments are too small at this point for us to tell.
Yeah, I'm going to go to our senior correspondent, Marko Gasic, in just a second. There's been something in from Putin, I believe, about it tonight. He'll tell us in a second. But going back to what we were saying there, then, so these headlines, if there are any, are going to be kind of for the domestic audience. They aren't going to be picked up internationally then tonight, you think? Back to you, Bill. What do you think? Well, I think we may have lost the line to him now. Let's go to Marko Gasic, senior correspondent. Murad, the consensus is that these won't make huge international headlines in the morning. It was for maybe home consumption, domestic consumption in Ukraine. Russia will also make plenty of headlines in it as well. And no doubt both sides were filming this, even though it's pitch dark, the lights were out. No pictures started to come through yet, no?
No. But this would have made international headlines if that ship had gone another perhaps dozen miles towards the strait. Undoubtedly, there would have been a very strong, armed, perhaps Russian reaction. But fortunately for all involved, whatever the ship's mission was, it was either cancelled or they did what they came out to do. They caused a stir, quite a stir. The Ukrainians again saying that this was a peaceful search and rescue vessel, despite the fact that we know that this is a command ship carrying out its mission in Ukrainian territorial waters, saying that it didn't enter any sensitive areas. The Russian Federal Security Service monitoring the situation there, stationed in the strait, where the security situation is always, it's always on alert. Them saying that this is incredibly dangerous behavior by the Ukrainian vessel, as well as provocative because of how it chose to approach this area without replying to hails from other vessels.
Well, that's the thing. As far as Russia's concerned, if it responded in the wrong way, I suppose command would have told the FSB there and the military there that are patrolling that bridge, etc., because it's Russian territory, it's Russian border, to show restraint, because they don't land themselves in even hotter water, do they?
Well, that is anyone's guess. All we know is that there would have been a Russian reaction if
what kind of thing?
Well, it could have been anything. They may have tried to ram it, of course, depending on how close it was to that critical bridge, which millions of vehicles pass over it every year. There's also there's two bridges, one a motorway, the other a railroad, both absolutely vital for Crimea.
Let's bring our viewers the map again to get a handle on it, if they're just checking in with everything that's been happening tonight and this story, just to get a handle on the Kerch Strait, the Sea of Azov, why it's important, what the rules are there, etc. Take us through it.
Well, extending from the green area of the Russian Federation are 12 nautical miles. Those are territorial waters. Those are waters that belong to any country. But because of the UN law of the sea, vessels from nations that border the Sea of Azov may pass through the strait, the Kerch Strait, so long as they file a notification that they're planning on passing through the strait with authorities there. This is done for security reasons primarily, but also to make sure that everything is running smoothly and in an organized, safe manner, because you have cars and trains passing overhead, and there's only a very narrow crossing under this bridge, and there's a huge amount of vessels that are always lined up to pass through. As we speak, there are around 80 vessels of all shapes and sizes planning, waiting their turn to pass through the strait. So you can imagine what sort of chaos would be caused if this huge military command ship went through, steamed through the crossing, regardless of queues, lines, security, and safety. Obviously, this is all happening against the backdrop of hysteria, international hysteria, mainly coming from the United States, Great Britain, which have maintained for weeks now that Russia was on the verge of invading Ukraine.
But they're also fed the satellite pictures, etc., which show a big build-up, whether it's the 100,000 that's being talked about. So what is it about then?
Initially, they had shown satellite pictures, not from the Ukrainian border, but from the Belarusian border, which is hours and hours away from Ukraine. They have since backtracked somewhat. Now we're hearing from the White House that, oh wait, the Russians haven't yet made the decision to invade Ukraine. We've heard all manner of threats over the course of the last week coming from the United States. We've also heard warnings from the Russians. A senior Russian official today saying that we may yet see a repeat or something close to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which this is how the Russians believe dangerous and unpredictable the situation is now, how far relations have fallen, collapsed between Russia and the United States primarily, but also perhaps Great Britain here as well. And this is again happening against the backdrop of a major, this isn't being talked about as much or at all, a major Ukrainian military buildup at the Donbass region in the east of Ukraine, which is where there's consistent and constant fighting. The OSCE reports violence has been on the up in recent weeks. And Vladimir Putin himself, I believe we have the video, has come out and has spoken with tremendous concern about what is happening in the east of Ukraine.
Let's listen to that then. It's coming up. Here it comes.
I should say that Russophobia is the first step towards genocide. What's going on in Donbass now very much resembles genocide. We see it and we know about it.
Russia has for many years said that it will stand by the people of Donbass, many of them, most of them, the vast majority, ethnic Russians, now many of them dual citizens of both Ukraine and Russia, passport holders. Russia has helped them over the years with humanitarian aid to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. It has said that it has an obligation to do so, given that the tremendous circumstances and the tremendous conditions, the horrific conditions that they live in, with the constant shelling, the blockades, the lack of food, and the constant danger of life in eastern Ukraine near the conflict line. Russia has consistently helped them, and it said it will continue to render them assistance until a peaceful resolution is reached for the conflict. But it said that the ball is in Ukraine's court, because Ukraine must do something to kickstart the process of reconciliation with its eastern regions.
Murat, stick with us a little bit more. Just want to recap for our viewers what's happened. We're going to take a short break for some ads. We'll come back to you in a minute. This is Arts International, and there's more on this breaking news. You can see it in red at the bottom of the ticker there. It's Kevin Owen taking you through it, and Marko Gasic, our senior correspondent. Just to recap, if you just checked in with us earlier on this evening, a Ukrainian naval ship started moving towards a very sensitive area as far as Russia's concerned, towards the Russian border of Crimea's Kerch Strait. Got to within about 18 nautical miles at the very last minute. It apparently hadn't given any indication to Russia that it wanted to pass under that strait, the border, to go into the Sea of Azov. Apparently, the FSB, who patrol that border area, repeatedly tried to get in contact with it. There were some comms, but then the comms were blacked out. Then we had from the Ukrainian side that they didn't know anything about said boat, which is quite strange, you might believe. But we still don't know what happened really tonight. Was it a provocation? Was it not? Stay with us. We'll try and scratch our heads and work out what the heck was going on there when we're back after the break.
The dynamism of the ecosystem of planet Earth predictably is dying because there's too much pollution. Whether it's landfill pollution, pollution in the rivers, pollution in the oceans, pollution in the air, chemical pollution, permanent chemical pollution, all the biosystems are dying. So humans effectively are committing mass suicide. Our species is becoming extinct.
Я видел, что все снимают тиктоки, и думал, о, прикольно, почему бы не сделать в России. Мы, наверное, первые переехали в дом из всех хаусов.
3 мальчика, и вот и я третий, мы собрались, стали думать, что у нас здесь в Якутске ничего такого нету. Надо было сделать свой какой-то блогерский дом.
И я просто смотрела, снимала, такая, ну, прикольно, прикольно. Я не думала, что это как-то на дальнейшую перспективу зайдет очень сильно.
Сейчас ТикТок это реально легче, ну, то есть снять можно любое видео на телефон.
Я хочу всегда быть в тренде и всегда следовать этим новым тенденциям, чтобы оставаться на плаву, потому что это очень важно.
Человек, который живет вообще в глубинке, но у него есть интернет, он может развиться до таких масштабов, что его будут знать по всему миру.
Платформа TikTok сама менее серьезная, чем YouTube и Instagram, но воспринимать нас стали серьезнее. Это какой-то нонсенс.
Браво! Браво! Это был TikTok-шоу!
It's 20 past midnight, Moscow time. This is RT International. Hello there. One big story we're talking about tonight. Well, it could have got worse, but it didn't happen. The developing story, a Ukrainian Navy ship earlier on was approaching the Russian border of Crimea's Kerch Strait, but then it changed course. This was about an hour or so ago. It's now sailing away from that sensitive area, the entrance to the Sea of Azov, with Ukraine's defense minister saying the ship didn't break any international laws. The former Soviet repair vessel did not apparently send a request to enter Russian waters and had ignored demands by the Russian border service to change course. Moscow said the ship posed a threat to navigational safety. At the moment, looking at the satellites and the mapping looking down in that area, some 80 civilian vessels are currently in the area. Let's take a look at the map. If you're just joining us, to show you where this was, to get a handle on the logistics a bit more as we zoom in. OK, well, here's a map showing where the Ukrainian ship was. Travelling at the time from a port in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. Russian security services say the vessel came less than 33 kilometres from Russia's Kerch Strait. It actually got closer than that, I think, at one point. Despite the ship reversing course, Russia's security services say it still poses a threat. I gather there's a comment coming up from them now. That response coming up.
The command ship Donbass has reversed course away from the Kerch Strait. It is not responding to inquiries. The actions of the Ukrainian ship's crew are regarded as provocative and endangering navigational safety.
Well, the Donbass was a command ship of the Ukrainian naval forces. It's a former Soviet repair ship known in Russia as a floating workshop. It's quite old, built back in 1969 at a Polish shipyard. And after the breakout of the Soviet Union, the breakup of it, it became part of the Ukrainian military fleet. Its name then changed for a while to Krasnodon, but then again in 2001, it was renamed Donbass. Maybe a connection to what happened tonight, maybe not. As part of the Ukrainian Navy, the vessel was repeatedly taking part previously in international military exercises, but we think tonight on its way back to port, and a crisis averted. Marko Gasic, our senior correspondent, has been across this for the last few hours. Murad, yeah, it all seems to be calming down tonight, but we're still actually none the wiser. Well, we have an idea maybe what went on, but there's no official substantive proof that it was any provocation. We haven't heard to the contrary. It could have literally just lost its radio comms, and it could have got lost.
Well, this is a command ship. It is doubtful that all of its radio systems would have malfunctioned at the same time. We also heard mixed messages from the Ukrainians, from their Ministry of Defense. First, they said, I believe this was the border service, said that they had no information on what this vessel was up to. And then we had the defense minister coming out and saying that this was indeed just a search and rescue vessel. Although we know that this is, unless something's dramatically changed on board, that this was a command ship of the Ukrainian military. And in fact, that they had plans to make it the core of a battle group, a Sea of Azov Ukrainian battle group. So it is very doubtful that it found something to search for and rescue just miles, a little over a dozen nautical miles away from the Strait of Kerch, which they know full well is very heavily patrolled, heavily guarded, and a very sensitive area, given the bridge that links Crimea and Russia, built recently, that has a motorway, railroad, and a very, very narrow transit point with a lot of traffic there. 80 vessels, I believe, as we speak, backed up there now, waiting for their turn to pass. Things had been suspended. The strait, I believe, was closed down temporarily while this Ukrainian vessel streamed for the transit point. Nevertheless, we have also heard from the Russian FSB, which called, obviously, just now, the behavior of the Ukrainian vessel provocative and dangerous because of all the marine traffic that is there waiting again for its turn to pass through that area.
As I say, until the authorities get a better handle on it, and investigators get a better handle on it, until more statements are made officially, we don't know it was a provocation. However, back in 2018, something pretty similar happened, didn't it?
Well, then again, yes, there were 3 Ukrainian vessels, naval vessels. There were 2 gunboats and a tugboat. And they tried to make their way, ram their way through the strait without asking for permission. So how the strait works is any Ukrainian or Russian vessel can pass so long as they can fit through the strait, but they have to file a request, a notification, to pass through the strait. This is again done for safety, for security and safety reasons, because there's a lot of marine traffic and very little space. So vessels have to be guided through the strait, helped along through the strait, and everything must be made sure to be as safe as possible. So in that case, in 2018, and we were there, there the day after this incident happened, it came to a shootout because these 3 Ukrainian vessels, again, as perhaps a statement, as part of a statement, them claiming that that Crimea is Ukrainian territory, they try to maneuver, they try to go through the strait without filing any notification, without any sort of approval from authorities there, and that ended poorly. There was a shootout and the Ukrainian vessels were impounded, the sailors were arrested before being handed back to Ukraine. The vessels as well were given back to Ukraine a little later. Fortunately, this didn't happen this time, but ever since then and before then, Ukraine has abided by the rules of transit in the Strait of Kerch. They have always filed a notification. They have always requested access, and everything is, is smooth as butter until now. There is, of course, also this coincidence that today the UN General Assembly issued a resolution or called on Russia to allow the free passage of all marine traffic to and from the Azov Sea via the Strait of Kerch. Though that happened earlier, so it is unclear, again, what the Ukrainians were planning and achieving with this. If the FSB, the Russian Federal Security Service, which guards the border, which guards the transit point, if they are to believe what this provocative incident, what the aim of it was, it remains unclear.
Is there any thought tonight that it was genuinely miscommunications and it got lost?
Well, again, as I said, it is incredibly unlikely that a command ship of the Ukrainian military would have lost its way in the Sea of Azov. First of all, it isn't all that big to begin with. And secondly, there's all sorts of navigational systems and equipment. If something breaks down, there's always something, a redundancy system in place, a backup system in place. Look, they could have sent an SOS signal or communicated that they had a malfunction. Somebody would have come to their rescue. The Russians had rescued various fishing vessels, Ukrainian fishing vessels in the Sea of Azov. Previously, there wouldn't have been a problem. In this case, it is highly doubtful that they had a systems error or perhaps a machine malfunction, because of which they drifted towards a very secure, well-guarded transit point.
All right, Murad, thanks for bringing us up to speed there. Right now, I'm guessing, but I think I'm right, we've got Martin Dolzer on the line, member of Germany's The Left Party. We've got Martin Summers on the line, an independent journalist. I'm hearing some shouting in my ear. Maybe that's not the case. And we've also got Dave Perkins, a radio host and political analyst on the line, who was with us earlier on. All 3 guys, I'm told, look at that, the wonders of modern technology, are there with us. Thanks for listening in. Thanks for making the time. So, who should we start? Who wants to chip in first here? Was it mistake, or was it a provocation? Who wants to give a thought on what's happened here? Who first?
Shall I go, because I haven't spoken?
Yes, please. Who is that first?
That's Martin Summers.
Hello, Martin. Hi, welcome to the show.
I've heard the contributions from the other fellas earlier on. I don't think it's a mistake. It's clearly not. It's brinkmanship, isn't it? And of course, because of the incident you referred to earlier in 2018, the possibility of shooting and potential casualties is definitely there. So you don't have to go as far as breaking through the strait in order to create the fuss that's been created. And the question is, why are they doing it? And it's to do with the politics in Ukraine and in the US and within NATO. Even when they talk out of one side of their mouth about the possibility of resolving things, other factions, both in Ukraine and elsewhere, are determined to keep things on the boil. And this is another example of that, in my view.
A pretty basic way of doing it, I did use the word cack-handed because I couldn't think of a better one earlier on, but a pretty daft way to do it tonight, given the sensitivity of everything going on at the moment, as far as Ukraine is concerned, or not? Or were they being very clever here? What do you think?
Well, it's not clever. I mean, it is, as you say, brinkmanship. But of course, we've already had a similar incident in 2018, which could have easily led to the loss of life. I mean, it certainly led to people being captured and the ships being impounded. And that's probably what would have happened here. And of course, that's possibly what would have happened to the British destroyer if it hadn't scarpered out of the territorial waters of Crimea more recently. Yeah. I think we're just in for a continuing saga of this kind, because there's no willingness to resolve this by going back to the Minsk protocols on the Ukrainian or on the Western side.
Let me get a view from Germany. Martin Dolzers, the member of Germany's the Left Party. Your thoughts? Accident here, mistake purely, or there was more to it? What do you think?
No, it's very clear a provocation, and I think it's a very bad sign that in this time, when there had been some talks in between Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden recently, just the last day, and now we have a provocation like that. I think that is the wrong direction we go. If there should be any solution and no escalation of the conflict in the Ukraine, the US and the NATO should stop to export more weapons to the Ukraine, and should stop as well to bring the Ukraine more into their mechanisms of warfare. So there should be some kind of getting back to the Minsk protocol. I don't see that in the moment. And this provocation is absolutely unnecessary from a point of view. If you want to cling to international law, and if you want to cling to a dialogue and not to escalation policies, there should be a change, to my mind. And that change should be stopping provocations all half year, or provoking as well through, for example, news articles which do just work with ressentiments, like there's an army concentration in front of the Ukrainian border. All this is like making fake news to escalate the situation. I don't like that at all. Peace is necessary there. Yeah,
Dave Perkins, just to pick up on what you were saying about this, it was to make headlines earlier on, but for our viewers just joining us, what's your take on what's potentially happened?
Seems to be, to me, a very careful exercise of incrementalism, as I mentioned before. And the Russians are going up by increments, massing troops and assets on a border, but in territory that belongs to them, therefore not an act to object to in any great measure. And this was less than the 2018 ship incursion into this strait, because that involved gunships with artillery pieces on the decks, and this one did not. It's a military ship, but not a gunship, and it did not come with any gunships in tow. So on the one hand, you can say, yes, they violated the protocols for navigating the strait that the Russians run and that they demand, and for good reason. But on the other hand, it was so unmilitary as to be less than the one from just 3 years ago. So you can see both sides are navigating this very small incremental line. Neither one of them wants to be the one that provokes military action from the other. And I think we can project this continuing out in small increments for some time to come.
All right, final thought on this from our last guest we haven't spoken to yet, Marko Gasic in the box there. Marko, again, what's your take as we're absorbing the headlines of the last hour or so? What do you think went on? Provocation, mistake?
Well, I think it shows that the hawks in Kiev and Washington indeed are running the show in Ukraine. But their problem is that if they do finally go for the real centre of attention for them, Donbass republics, and lose them, then they attack effectively the population there, provoke Russia into a reaction, and the only way that that population will be protected is by Russia actually controlling the territory. So the Ukrainian authorities know if they attack their eastern population, they may well lose their eastern population. So that's the difficulty for the hawks. They don't want to go in there too early. That's why we have this constant brinkmanship and work all round in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of dimensions, designed to weaken the position on the other side incrementally over a period of time.
All right, guys, thank you very much for being with us there. We'll come back to you later. Appreciate you coming onto the programme. Martin Doles, Dave Perkins, Martin Summers and Marko Gasic as well. Thank you. Maybe come back to you later and get you more thoughts on what's happened tonight. It's midnight 35 Moscow time. You're with RT International. A reminder, if you just joined us, is Kevin Owen here, our developing story. That could have got bigger. Seems to have been averted. A problem earlier on this evening, a Ukrainian Navy ship approaching the Russian border of Crimea's Kerch Strait changed its course, what I could call you could call the last few minutes. It was around about 17 nautical miles away from that sensitive border. It's apparently sailing away now officially back from the strait, with Ukraine's defence minister saying the ship didn't break any international laws. It was a former Soviet repair vessel that didn't send a request apparently to enter Russian waters and ignored demands by the Russian border service to change course. Moscow said the ship posed a threat, though, to navigational safety. Currently, some 80 civilian vessels are currently in the area. We'll bring you more on it after the break.